Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Let's talk about some news and hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. You know what we talk about here. Anyway, here are some news about the grain deal. Russia is planning to send food to Africa because they have canceled. They do not want to be a part of this grain deal no more, right? Because most of the food didn't even reach Africa anyway. And plus, the Russian government is claiming that Ukraine is smuggling weapons via by exploiting this grain deal, so to speak. Can be true. Who knows? But the the thing about food not reaching Africa is true. So here we have Peskov in this Telesur article talking about Russia ready to supply free grain to African countries. Dmitry Peskov. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Tuesday that Russia is offering to replace Ukrainian grain supplies to needy countries free of charge after withdrawing from the grain deal. Speaking to reporters, Peskov said that the poorest countries in Africa have benefited the least from the Black Sea Initiative for Ukrainian grain exports. These issues will be discussed at the Russia-Africa Summit to be held in St. Petersburg on July 27th and 28th. We are in contact with our African partners. These contacts will continue at the St. Petersburg Summit. We are preparing and waiting for them, the spokesman noted. According to Alexander Polyakov, deputy head of the Africa Department of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Moscow has received confirmation from 49 countries to participate in the Russia-Africa Summit. So they plan to do this. Financial Times talked about this as well, but yeah, they weren't as positive. They claimed that Qatar and Turkey were against this or something like that. Unfortunately, I can't read it because there is a paywall there. But in other news, there was a Russian drills or Russian warships conducted drills in the Black Sea, and Navy vessels trained in intercepting trespassers in a no-go zone. Russia's Black Fleet has conducted an exercise in enforcing a naval blockade, the Defense Ministry reported on Friday. The drills come after Russia and Ukraine declared that they would presume all civilian ships traveling to each other's ports to be carrying military cargo. According to the Russian ministry statement, warships and naval aviation trained in isolating an area that was temporarily suspended for traffic and conducted measures to detain a simulated trespassing vessel. During the same exercise, a Russian patrol boat fired cruise missiles at target ship placed on training range. It was successful hit and destroyed, the ministry reported. Well, are they training because they're trying to set up a real blockade in the Black Sea to prevent Ukraine from, smuggling weapons, as they claim? Could be a possibility. On Monday, Russia declined to extend the Black Sea Initiative, a UN and Turkey mediated arrangement with Ukraine, which allowed Kiev to export grain via its seaports. Moscow said the UN had failed to deliver on its part of the bargain and convinced Western nations to lift sanctions, hampering Russian exports of food and fertilizers. Yes, I believe that they are pretty much trying to enforce a no-go zone, basically in the Black Sea, as a consequence of the of Russia not wanting to extend the grain deal anymore. So this also come amidst all of this, Russia reveals details of massive strikes on Ukraine. So they hit a bunch of like fuel infrastructure and ammunition. This was like 19th of July after the Ukrainians hit the Kursk bridge, and the Russians hit again with hit back. Sorry, with these huge, massive missile strikes. Right. I believe, like other military analysts, that these strikes have been, well, these objects that they hit were, they probably had some eye on them for months, for a long time at least, um, because it's very strategic hits. And Putin also warns Poland's intention in Ukraine and Belarus. Now, we've spoken before about Polish intentions of conquering Galicia again, Western Ukraine, because historically speaking, this part of Ukraine was part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth for quite some time, right? And the population in this area had been subjected to Polish rule and culture since 1304, I believe. There were also some exceptions between somewhere in the 1700s, something like that, when the Habsburg Empire controlled the area. Oh, sorry, the Austrians, yeah. And Putin is claiming here that, that if the Ukrainians want to give up their territory, it's up to them. But Poland is also trying to use this opportunity to overthrow the Lukashenko government in Belarus, which is a no-no for Russia. I believe if the Polish politicians had played their cards right a little better, if they weren't so antagonistic against Russia, Russia would have probably agreed for Poland to take over Galicia. I mean, they could care less. This area is heavily anti-Russian anyway. I mean, there's really nothing there in terms of like resources. But Poland, I believe, and many others believe, that this is going to be a huge mistake in the long run, because Ukrainian nationalists have been anti-Polish for a long time. I mean, their first enemies were the Poles. And the reason for that was because the Polish had pretty much Polonized their aristocracy, right? So the Ukrainian aristocracy started becoming Polish, basically. And this left the Ukrainians without an intellectual class or a class of, aristocrats, basically. And they became a rendered class of peasants. And especially in eastern parts of Galicia, where the ethnic Ukrainians were the majority, they were often subjected to feudal rule by Polish landlords, and they were mistreated by these Polish landlords. And this obviously caused a lot of resentment from the Ukrainians against the Poles. So the the Ukrainian question have always been a hot topic, or at least for a long time was a hot topic in Poland. Speaking of which, there has been a lot of anti-Ukrainian demonstrations in Poland. Oddly enough, I can't find them on Google when I'm trying to find the news, but I've seen it in alternative media channels, because there is bad blood between Ukrainian nationalists and the Poles. The massacre in Volhynia, where Ukrainian nationalists kill like 110,000 Polish people. They also kill a lot of Jews. The hostility towards the Jews was because Ukrainian nationalists considered the Jews as a merchant class of agents who supported the Polish landlords, and they also worked for the Russian Empire. So, yeah, Ukrainian nationalism didn't really get a strong foothold, though, in eastern Ukraine, which was known as Russian Ukraine back in the Russian Empire days. Um, there, the Ukrainians and Russians kind of got along better. But yes, the modern day Ukrainian nationalism that we see today is more of a Galician identity. So that's how it is. Um, and of course, the Russians warned the Poles if they would do this, that they will respond with all the means of their disposal, right? So let's see if we got some more news to cover. Oh, yes. Igor Strelkov has been arrested for alleged extremism ties, or yeah, just for extremism, I guess. On suspicion of extremism, his wife claims. He used to be a commander in one of the Donbass militias. He was also a suspect in the Dutch investigation into the downing of MH17. He is now a popular military blogger. He is very critical of the Russian government and the military leadership because he thinks that Moscow is too soft on Ukraine. And he has challenged Prigozhin at times, and Prigozhin has challenged him, hey, why don't you come down here and fight, la la la. I noticed that a lot of these extreme guys in the Russian military and national sphere, they are a lot of them are getting suppressed, or and they're not making a lot of good use. To be honest with you, the Russian government wants to do this steady and slow. It's a war of attrition. They want to demilitarize not just Ukraine but also NATO. And NATO is becoming demilitarized. They are having issues finding ammunition. And there was talks about Fox News that America should, start produce weapons in terms of as if they were on a war footing. But I don't know. Maybe it's a bit too late. So, yeah. But Russia is producing weapons like crazy. I mean, it's insane. Like 60,000 plus artillery shells. The Russians fire in one day. I mean, imagine how much they must produce. I think we can go to the next article, which is here. The Italian defense minister admit this as well. The most Ukrainian grain does not reach Africa. Guido Crosetto has warned that if poorer nations do not receive vital food supplies, it could destabilize the region. In fact, one of the reasons why Afghanistan did not face a starvation catastrophe was because Russia and China actually sent food there. And he's right. If African nations do not receive this grain, then there will be a refugee crisis. So I hope that Russia can supply this grain. But let's read through the article. Italian Defense Minister Guido Crosetto has claimed that only a tiny fraction of Ukraine's grain exports are going to Africa, contrary to the goals of the Black Sea Initiative, causing prices of staple foods on the continent to soar. Speaking to the La Stampa news outlet on Friday, Crosetto was asked if the Ukrainian grain deal, which was recently suspended by Russia, could affect stability in North Africa. The minister replied by pointing out that Everything is connected, and it is certainly an element of concern. 95% of exported Ukrainian grain does not go to Africa. And when those countries don't have the supplies, they need to look elsewhere. And inevitably, the global prices rise, making it even more difficult for African nations to import. It is destabilizing regions that are already in difficulty, and this problem clearly also affects Europe, Crosetto said. Grain prices surged earlier this week after Russia announced the termination of the Turkey and UN brokered Black Sea Initiative under the deal, which took effect in July 2022 and had been repeatedly extended since. Russia lifted its blockade of the Ukrainian Black Sea ports to allow the export of Ukrainian grain to the world markets. The agreement was also supposed to remove barriers to export of Russian grain and fertilizer. However, Moscow has insisted that none of the promises made under the agreement were kept. Exactly. With President Vladimir Putin claiming last week that not a single goal linked to the interests of the Russian Federation was met, and describing the deal as a one-sided game. Russia has also repeatedly criticized the West for failing to use the grain deal for its original purpose, to avert famine in poorer countries. According to Moscow, the vast majority of agricultural goods that should have been delivered to poorer nations under the deal, including those in Africa, have still not reached them and have instead ended up in Europe, as we spoke about before. Back in March, President Vladimir Putin also announced that if Russia were to suspend the Black Sea deal, it would consider a plan to send the entire volume of grain that was sent from Russia to African countries during the previous period, free of charge to countries in need. So there you go, guys. The Italian defense minister also admit this, right? All right, this was a little bit of a shorter video, I guess, but I appreciate you guys for watching. Please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.